Hello, everyone, and thank you. Thank you for being here with me in this quiet space. Before I begin, I'd love to feel your presence. Please share the city you're joining me from in the comments. It helps to know I'm not just speaking into a void, that you're out there listening. Today, I'm going to share a story with you. It's the story of the day my life, the one I thought I knew, ended. And it began with what I believed was the most perfect morning. The alarm didn't wake me. I was already awake, my eyes open in the pre-dawn darkness, staring at the faint cracks in the ceiling I knew by heart. 5 a.m. On the morning of my son Elijah's wedding. The house was so still, so silent. It felt like it was holding its breath. I told myself the fluttering in my chest was just nerves, the kind any mother feels when she's about to give her child away to a new life. But deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I knew it was something else. A dread. A cold, slick feeling of impending change. I slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb Franklin. He was sleeping so peacefully, one arm thrown over his eyes. My husband of 25 years. I stood there for a moment, just watching him. This man I had built a lifetime with. The faint light from the window caught the silver at his temples, and my heart gave a familiar, aching squeeze. We weren't just husband and wife. We were a monument to endurance. Or so I thought. I padded down the hallway, my hand instinctively trailing along the wall, past the framed photos that told our story. Elijah's gap-toothed kindergarten smile, our family vacation at the beach, Franklin tanned and laughing with a tiny Elijah on his shoulders, our 20th anniversary portrait, a gallery of a happy life, a gallery of lies, I would later learn. I ended up here, in my home office. This was my sanctuary. I run a small CPA firm from home. Nothing flashy, but it was mine. This business, built on spreadsheets and late nights, had paid for Elijah's college. It had covered the extras that Franklin's salary, for all his charm and big promises, never quite reached. I clicked on my laptop. The blue light harsh in the dark room. The numbers on the screen, columns of debits and credits, were a meaningless blur. My mind was somewhere else entirely. I could already picture it. Outside, the world of our Atlanta, Georgia estate was still draped in navy blue silence, but in my mind, the sun was already high. I could see it all, painted in perfect, vivid detail. The white chairs, arranged in flawless rows on the emerald green lawn. The arch, oh, the arch. Franklin had built it with his own hands last spring, a sturdy, beautiful structure. And I had spent every weekend since tending to the rose bushes I'd nurtured from tiny, vulnerable buds. I had wound each delicate stem, each thorny branch around that wood until it was a living, breathing wall of blush pink and creamy white. I had checked the string lights 3 times myself, climbing the ladder until my legs ached, making sure not a single bulb was out. Not one. Everything had to be perfect. Our son, our Elijah, deserved a perfect day. He deserved the fairy tale I still so desperately wanted to believe in. 25 years of marriage to Franklin. 23 years raising Elijah. I had dedicated my entire adult life, my very identity to this family. I was the steady hand. I was the planner, the one who remembered dental appointments and pediatrician visits. I was the keeper of the calendar, the one who knew that Franklin was allergic to penicillin and that Elijah had a secret love for strawberry Pop-Tarts, even at 23. I made sure the mortgage was paid, the cars were insured, that there was always milk in the fridge. I was the foundation, The unshakable, reliable, often invisible foundation that Franklin, the beautiful, dazzling house, leaned upon. And for a long, long time, that was enough for me. To see him shine, to hear his laughter fill a room felt like my accomplishment. But lately something had felt off. A silent, chilling distance had settled in the spaces between us. It was in the way he would stop talking mid-sentence when I walked into a room, the conversation dying on his lips. It was in the way his phone, which used to lie carelessly on the counter, was now always face down or tilted just away from my line of sight. A few weeks ago, I finally gathered the courage to ask, "Franklin, is everything okay? You feel a million miles away." He had turned to me, and with that same charming, disarming smile that had made me fall in love with him at a college party a lifetime ago, he laughed. It was a light, airy sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just work, honey. You know how it is. Big promotion on the line, lots of pressure." I remember nodding, forcing a smile onto my own face. "Of course," I said. "Just talk to me, okay?" He'd kissed my forehead, a dry, perfunctory gesture. "Always do, Simone." But he didn't. I chose to believe him. What else could I do? You don't just toss 25 years of shared history, of inside jokes and weathered storms overboard because of a gnawing feeling in your gut. You convince yourself you're being paranoid. You tell yourself you're just a tired, middle-aged woman seeing ghosts. The soft click of my office door pulled me from my thoughts. It was Elijah. He stood there in his pajama bottoms and a faded university t-shirt, a steaming mug of coffee clutched in his hands. My beautiful boy. At 23, he had my serious, practical nature, but he had his father's devastatingly handsome features, the same dark, expressive eyes, the same smile that could light up a city block. "Mom," he said, his voice rough with sleep, "you've been up for hours. The wedding isn't until 4. I closed my laptop, attempting a cheerful smile that felt like it might crack my face. "I just want everything to be perfect for my boy." He walked over and sat on the edge of my desk, the way he had when he was a teenager, and suddenly he looked so much younger, so much more vulnerable. "Your dad is still sleeping," he said, but there was a strange, flat note in his voice, a dissonant chord. "He left early." I frowned. "He did? Why?" "Said he had to pick up a last-minute gift for Madison's parents, the Ellingtons." A cold trickle of unease ran down my spine. That was new. That was a detail that hadn't been part of the intricate wedding day schedule I had memorized. "Mom?" Elijah hesitated, his gaze fixed on the dark liquid in his mug. "Can I ask you something?" I turned my chair to face him fully. Under the unforgiving glare of my desk lamp, every line of worry on his young face was illuminated. "Anything, sweetie. What's on your mind?" He took a deep, shaky breath as if steeling himself for a blow, and then he asked the question that would become the first crack in the foundation of our world. "Do you think Madison, do you think she really loves me?" The question hit me with the force of a physical blow. It stole the air from my lungs. Madison, his fiancée, ambitious, stunningly beautiful, a brilliant young architect from the powerful old money Ellington family. On paper, she was everything we had always wanted for Elijah, the perfect addition to our perfect picture. But I'd had my own doubts, quiet little whispers I'd buried deep. I had seen how her eyes would sometimes drift, glazing over with a polite boredom when Elijah talked with passionate intensity about his projects. I had noticed how she would discreetly check her phone under the table during our family dinners, a tiny secret smile playing on her lips. "Why would you ask that, honey?" I managed to say, my voice tighter than I intended. "It's your wedding day." I know, he mumbled, staring into his coffee as if it were a crystal ball. And maybe it's just last-minute jitters. But sometimes, Mom, sometimes when she looks at me, I feel like she's looking right through me. Like I'm just a box she needed to check off on her way to the perfect life. He paused, and the silence in the room grew heavy, pregnant with unspoken fears. And lately, he whispered, the words barely audible, she's been spending a lot of time with Dad. My heart wasn't just beating. It was a wild, trapped bird slamming against the cage of my ribs. The sound was so loud in my ears, I was sure Franklin would hear it from inside the house. I watched from the kitchen window as Madison stepped out of her sleek white BMW. Even in simple jeans and a blouse, she moved with a devastating casual grace that seemed to mock my own carefully constructed life. She belonged on a magazine cover, and in that moment, I felt every one of my 50 years etched deeply into my soul. I slipped out the back door, the morning air cool on my feverish skin. I crouched low, my knees pressing into the soft, damp earth behind the hydrangea bushes. My hydrangeas. I had planted these very bushes the spring Elijah started high school, their vibrant blues and pinks, a celebration of a new chapter. Now, they were a hiding place, a shield for the most humiliating moment of my life. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. And then I saw them. Through the large bay window of our living room, the room where we'd put up every single Christmas tree, where we'd read Goodnight Moon to a small, sleepy Elijah 1,000 times, Franklin was pouring her a drink at our fireplace. His body was angled towards her in a way it hadn't been towards me in years. It was an intimate, closed-off circle, and I was on the outside looking in. His hand went to the small of her back. A casual, friendly gesture? No. This was different. It lingered. It pressed. It was a claim. My own hands clenched into fists, my manicured nails, a treat for the wedding, digging half moons into my palms. The pain was an anchor, the only real thing in this spiraling nightmare. I was about to rise. A fury white hot and blinding surged through me. I would storm in there. I would scream. I would tear this perfect, fraudulent world down with my bare hands. But then I saw him. A movement. A shadow in the reflection of the glass. My eyes darted upwards. Elijah. He was standing at the top of the stairs, shrouded in the dim hallway light. He was so still, so utterly broken. The sight of my son, my beautiful boy, witnessing this violation, it froze the rage in my veins, replacing it with a grief so profound it stole my breath. This wasn't just my betrayal. It was his. Downstairs, the scene descended into a deeper level of hell. Madison laughed, placing a hand on Franklin's chest. She leaned into him, and he threw his head back and laughed, a sound of pure, unburdened joy I hadn't heard from him in a decade. It was the laugh he reserved for the beginning of us, when everything was still possible. And he was giving it to her. In our home. On our son's wedding day. Then he framed her face with his hands, his fingers tangling in her hair, and he kissed her. It wasn't a peck. It was a deep, hungry, passionate kiss that spoke of familiarity and longing, a kiss that should have been mine. My vision tinged with red. A roaring sound filled my head, drowning out the world. I took a stumbling step forward, ready to burn it all down. A hand gripped my arm, firm and urgent. I spun, my heart in my throat, and found Elijah beside me. He had slipped out of the house silently. His face was a ghostly pale mask, but his eyes were ancient. They held a cold, hard fire that terrified me. "Mom, don't," he whispered, his voice strained, barely audible. "Not yet, Elijah. This is—" I choked, the words, "our life is over," sticking in my throat. I know what it is, he said, his voice terrifyingly steady, though I could see his hands trembling. Mom, I've known for weeks. Weeks. The word landed not like a slap, but like a shovel of dirt on a grave. I stared at the man my son had become overnight, a man carved by betrayal, his youth sacrificed at the altar of his father's deceit. We were two ghosts crouched in the garden, hiding from the living. I didn't want to believe it, he whispered, the words raw and torn from him. I made excuses. He's just being kind. She's just nervous. He let out a sharp, bitter breath. The way she lit up for him, he corrected himself, the slip a fresh wound. I mean, for Madison, she was supposed to be gaining a mother, not a rival.
That evening, after the world had tilted off its axis behind the hydrangea bushes, was one of the most surreal of my life. Franklin came home, the very picture of the devoted husband and proud father. He was buzzing with a false energy, talking about his speech for the reception, about how proud he was of Elijah, about the perfect forecast for tomorrow. "The caterer confirmed the lobster bisque, Simone," he said, smiling that easy, charming smile that had once made my knees weak. Now it felt like a mask, painted on and grotesque. It's going to be a day they'll never forget. You have no idea, I thought. The hypocrisy was so thick, so suffocating, I felt like I was breathing underwater. I just nodded and smiled, my face a stiff, painted-on replica of the woman I was supposed to be. Inside, I was screaming. Inside, I was already a widow, mourning the death of my marriage in a silent, solitary funeral. After Franklin finally went to bed, snoring softly in the bed we had shared for a quarter of a century, the real work began. Elijah and I met in my home office. The door was locked, the blinds drawn tight, shutting out the world that still believed in our perfect family. The room, my sanctuary, had been transformed into a war room. And on my desk, where spreadsheets used to live, now lay the beginnings of a file of evidence so damning it would make a prosecutor weep with joy and a wife's heart turn to dust. "Tell me about that detective," I said, my voice hollow, as I picked up a surveillance photo. It was a close-up of Franklin and Madison, laughing, their heads close together in a dimly lit restaurant booth. The timestamp was from a Tuesday evening when he had told me he was working late on a critical proposal. "Her name is Rose," Elijah said, his own voice steady, but I could see the tremor in his hands. Rose Whitfield. The name hit me, not like a splash of cold water, but like a tidal wave. It stole the air from my lungs. Rose. My sister? My little sister? "Rose," I whispered, the word a strangled thing. Elijah nodded, a look of sheepish resolve on his face. I didn't know who else to call Mom. I knew she was a cop for 20 years before retiring and starting her own PI agency. I knew she was smart, relentless, and I knew... He hesitated. I knew she'd be discreet, and I also knew she never really liked Dad. A short, sharp laugh escaped me, a sound more like a sob. It was true. Rose, with her sharp cop's intuition, had always been wary of Franklin's charm, calling it too polished. I had always defended him, told her she was being cynical. The shame of that now was a hot, branding iron on my soul. I had been too proud, too terrified, to admit to my own sister that the foundation of my life might be crumbling. "I'll call her," I said, my voice thick with a cocktail of dread and a desperate need for the truth. She answered on the second ring. "Simone?" It's past midnight. Is everything okay? And that's when the dam inside me, the one I had been reinforcing for months with denial and false hope, finally shattered.
No, Rose, I choked out, the tears coming in a torrent I could no longer control. Nothing is okay. Nothing will ever be okay again. And I told her everything. I poured the poisoned chalice of our day into her ear, Elijah's fears, the nauseating scene we had witnessed that morning, the gallery of betrayal on Elijah's phone. I cried ugly, gut-wrenching sobs, the kind that tears something loose inside you. I was a raw, exposed nerve, and for the first time all day, I wasn't the strong one. I was just a broken woman. Rose listened. There was no shock, no dramatic gasp, just a grim, heavy silence, and then a quiet, "I'm not surprised, Simone." Her voice was calm, a lifeline in my storm. I've seen the way he looks at that girl for months. I was just hoping I was wrong. Elijah told me about the photos, I said, wiping my eyes with a trembling hand. What else do you have, Rose? I need to know. I need to know how deep this goes. Her voice shifted, turning professional, clinical. It was a tone I'd never heard from my little sister before. I've been tracking their movements for 3 weeks. They meet twice a week like clockwork, Simone. The St. Regis at Nanta. He always pays in cash. They have lunch at places he'd never take you. Intimate, expensive little bistros. Last week, he took her to Cartier. Cartier. The word was a punch to the gut. Our money, the money I had managed so carefully, squirreling away for our retirement, for a future we were supposed to grow old in together, the money from my small business, the fruit of my labor. It was being used to buy trinkets for his mistress, while he told me we needed to be careful with our expenses. And Simone, Rose's voice softened, laced with a pity that was somehow worse than the clinical tone. There's more now. Something bigger. I've been digging into Franklin's financials, trying to find the source of all this cash, and he's been sloppy. What did you find? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs, dreading the answer. There was a long, heavy pause on the line, a silence that seemed to stretch into eternity. It's not just Madison, Simone, she said, her voice as heavy as stone. It's not the first time. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. She found a series of regular monthly payments, going back 15 years, always to the same person, a woman named Nicole Jenkins. The name meant nothing to me. It was just a name. Who is she? I did some digging. She was a junior associate at his old firm when Elijah was just a little boy. She left the company abruptly about 15 years ago. The payments started a few months after she left. Rose took a deep, audible breath, and I knew, with a terrifying primal certainty, that whatever came next would be the thing that broke me forever. Simone, she said, her voice barely a whisper, she has a daughter, a 15-year-old girl named Zoe. The world stopped. The air vanished from the room. I couldn't breathe. I ran a background check. Rose pressed on, her words coming like nails in a coffin. The father isn't listed on the birth certificate, but I'd bet my license, my life, that Franklin is her father. A daughter. An entire other child. 15 years. The number echoed in my hollowed-out soul. 15 years. For 15 years, I had loved him, trusted him, built a life with him. I had held his hand when his father died. I had cheered for his promotions. I had nursed him through the flu. For 15 years, while I was reading bedtime stories to our son, he had another daughter. A sister Elijah never knew. The secret trips, the business dinners, the emotional distance that I had blamed on stress, on work, on midlife crisis. It all clicked into place with a horrifying, devastating clarity. It wasn't a chapter of betrayal, it was the entire book. My whole marriage was a lie. "I have to know for sure, Rose," I whispered, my voice a ghost of itself. "I know," she said. "I'll handle it. But Simone, you have to be prepared. When this drops, it's not a bomb. It's a nuclear winter." I looked across the desk at Elijah, who was watching me, his face pale but resolute. I felt a strange, terrifying calm descend over me. The pain was still there, a gaping, weeping wound in my chest, but now it was accompanied by something else, something cold, something hard, something unforgiving. "I know," I said, my voice no longer shaking, but flat and hard as steel. "That's exactly what we're counting on." But the revelations weren't over. The poison had more layers. "And what about Madison?" I asked, latching onto a target for the fury that was now melting the ice in my veins. "You said there was more on her." Rose's expression hardened again. "Right, Madison. Let's talk about the fiancée." She turned her laptop toward me, opening a new file filled with financial documents. "She's not just sleeping with your husband, Simone. She's been embezzling funds from her law firm." The words took a moment to register. "What?" "She's a junior partner at a prestigious downtown firm. She's been inflating expense reports, creating fake invoices for non-existent consultants, and siphoning the money into a private bank account. It's not huge amounts at a time, but it's steady. In the last year alone, she's stolen over $200,000. I gasped. $200,000? "And I can trace some of that money," Rose said, her voice dripping with disgust as she showed me a bank transfer followed by a credit card statement for a $1,000 watch, "directly to gifts for Franklin." The circle was complete. The most perfectly disgusting, vicious circle I could ever imagine. She was stealing from her partners to buy gifts for her lover, who was stealing from his wife to buy gifts for her. Madison wasn't just a homewrecker, she was a criminal. And she was about to marry my son, weaving her corruption and lies directly into the tattered remains of my family. The last of the numbness in my chest vanished, incinerated by a white-hot, righteous fury. This was no longer just about my broken heart. This was about protecting my son. This was about justice. I looked my sister in the eye, the shattered pieces of my soul coalescing into a single, sharp point of purpose. "Okay," I said, my voice clear and cold. "The wedding plan. Let's go over it one more time. I want it to be perfect." The 24 hours that separated me from the end of my world were a masterclass in acting. I moved through the wedding preparations like a ghost, my body a perfectly programmed automaton while my mind screamed in a soundproof room. I smiled at my aunts, I laughed with my cousins, I assured the wedding planner that the peonies were exactly the right shade of ivory. I was the picture of serene maternal pride. And Franklin was in his element. He worked the growing crowd on our lawn, accepting backslaps and congratulations with that wide, winning smile. He found me at one point, wrapping an arm around my waist and pulling me close. His touch felt like a violation. "You look beautiful, Simone," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear, a line he'd used 1,000 times. "Isn't it a perfect day?" I looked into his eyes, the same eyes that had held love, that had held fear when Elijah was born, that now held a lifetime of lies, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not pain, just a cold, desolate emptiness, like staring into the void of deep space. "Perfect," I echoed, my smile a carefully crafted lie. My son, my Elijah, was my mirror. He greeted his friends, posed for photos with his groomsmen, a handsome, smiling groom. But every time our eyes met across the crowded lawn, a silent message passed between us, a flicker of steel, a nod of resolve. We were soldiers, waiting for the signal to detonate the battlefield. The plan was simple, and Rose, my brilliant sister, had rehearsed it with us until it was muscle memory. She had arrived early, disguised in a catering staff uniform, her face a mask of professional detachment. Her high-end audio-visual equipment was hidden in plain sight, patched into the large projection screen we'd rented for the sentimental slideshow of Elijah's life. No one suspected a thing. She had the small, unassuming remote control in her pocket. One button. That's all it would take. I had my own role to play. In my clutch purse, next to my lipstick, was a sealed envelope containing divorce papers I'd had my attorney prepare a week prior. I also had a flash drive, a tiny, weightless thing that held the nuclear codes to my marriage. Every photo, every bank statement, the DNA report. One way or another, my marriage would officially end today. I wasn't just planning a confrontation. I was planning my liberation. At 4:05 p.m., I took my seat in the front row. The string quartet began to play something soft and classical. The air was sweet with the scent of my roses. The sun was a perfect golden orb. One by one, the wedding party made their entrance. Franklin sat beside me, reaching over and squeezing my hand. His skin felt like a stranger's. I forced myself not to flinch, not to pull away. And then she appeared, Madison, a vision in white lace and silk, gliding down the aisle on her father's arm. She looked radiant, ethereal, and utterly, completely fraudulent. She smiled at the guests, a picture of blushing innocence, and then her eyes flickered to the front row, to Franklin. For a split second, a look passed between them. It wasn't a glance, it was a collision, a look of shared secrets, of triumphant conspiracy. They thought they had won. They were standing at the finish line of their deception, medals around their necks.
Elijah stood at the altar, his face an unreadable mask of solemnity. When Madison joined him, he took her hand. His expression didn't waver. He looked out at the crowd, his gaze scanning the faces, until it landed on mine, and he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. The officiant began. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. The words about love, commitment, and fidelity hung in the air, so thick with irony I could barely breathe. I wondered if Franklin and Madison were even listening, or if they were already mentally counting the minutes until they could be alone. They exchanged vows, promises they had already broken 100 times over, to have and hold, like he held her in our living room, for better, for worse. This is the worse, you monster. Forsaking all others. My stomach churned, a toxic brew of grief and fury. Finally, the officiant reached the moment. He smiled benevolently at the 300 guests. Therefore, if anyone can show just cause why they may not be lawfully joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. A reverent silence fell over the garden. This was it. My heart wasn't just hammering. It was a frantic drumbeat against the cage of my ribs, a primal scream of a dying life. I could feel the weight of every eye, the expectation of perfect silence. I took a slow, deliberate breath, filling my lungs with the fragrant, poisoned air. And then I stood. The moment I rose, a collective sharp gasp rippled through the crowd. The soft music seemed to cut off. The warm, buzzing atmosphere turned thick and frozen. Every single head turned toward me. I could feel their confusion, their shock, their morbid curiosity like a physical pressure. Franklin, sitting beside me, went rigid. "Simone," he hissed, his voice a low, venomous whisper. His hand clamped around my arm like a vice. I shook his hand off as if it were a venomous snake. I looked past him, my eyes locking with Elijah's. His pale, resolute face gave me strength. Then I looked at Madison, whose radiant smile had shattered into a mask of confused horror. "I'm sorry, everyone," I said, and my voice, to my own surprise, was clear and steady, carrying across the deathly silent garden. "I apologize for this interruption, but I believe the officiant asked if there was any reason this marriage should not proceed." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in, feeling the tension stretch to its breaking point. "And yes," I said, my voice dropping, becoming deadly serious. "I do. I have a reason." A wave of frantic murmuring swept through the crowd. I saw Franklin's father, the esteemed Judge Ellington, rise from his seat, his face a thundercloud of indignation. "Mrs. Whitfield," he boomed, his voice accustomed to command. "What is the meaning of this?" "The meaning, Judge Ellington," I said, turning to face him squarely, "is that your daughter is about to marry my son under profoundly false pretenses. And I believe you, and every single person gathered here who cares for Elijah, deserve to know the truth." I pulled the small remote from my purse. My thumb found the single red button. Franklin sputtered, lurching to his feet, his face flushing a blotchy, furious crimson. "Simone, you've lost your mind. You're embarrassing our son. Sit down." I turned my gaze to him, and my voice dropped to an icy, terrifying calm. "Am I, Franklin? You're the one who has embarrassed our son. You and your mistress." And I pressed the button. Behind the altar, the large screen flickered to life. The first image was the crisp, high-resolution surveillance photo of Franklin and Madison locked in that passionate, desperate kiss in our living room. The one from just yesterday, the one that had broken my son's heart. The crowd didn't just gasp, they erupted. There were screams, shouts, people standing on their chairs to see. I saw Madison's mother bring a hand to her chest, her face draining of all color. "But that's not all," I called out, my voice rising above the chaos. "You see, this wasn't a one-time mistake. This has been a long-term, calculated affair." The screen changed. A photo of them entering the St. Regis Atlanta, a timestamp from 3 weeks ago, then another, and another. A devastating collage of their secret life. Intimate dinners, hurried meetings in parking garages, laughing together in a way Franklin never laughed with me anymore. "This is fake," he was shouting, pointing a shaking finger at the screen. "Those are photoshopped, montages. My wife is having a nervous breakdown." "Am I, Franklin?" I asked, my voice quiet but cutting through his lies like a scalpel. "Then perhaps you can explain this." The screen changed again. This time, it was bank statements. I used a laser pointer, my hand steady as a surgeon's. "These are the regular cash withdrawals, always under $1,000 from different branches. And these," I said, highlighting another document, "are the forged signatures on loan documents against my pension plan, our retirement, Franklin, our future." A receipt from Cartier for a $15,000 necklace flashed on the screen, followed immediately by a photo of Madison wearing that exact necklace at her bachelorette party. The noise from the crowd began to die down, replaced by a stunned, horrified silence. This was no longer a tawdry affair. This was a crime. My husband, I announced, my voice ringing with a cold fury, has been systematically stealing from our family to fund his affair. And his fiancée, I turned my gaze to Madison, who was trembling violently, has been busy too. The next slide showed the evidence of her embezzlement, the fake invoices, the shell corporation, the bank transfers. I saw her law partners in the audience, their faces shifting from confusion to pure, unadulterated rage.
But the most devastating truth, I said, my voice dropping, trembling for the first time with 15 years of repressed agony, the true heart of the deceit that has defined my entire marriage is that my husband's lies did not start with Madison. The DNA test results filled the screen. The words, probability of paternity, 99.999%, were displayed in huge, bold, undeniable letters. And below it, a photo. A photo of a pretty, smiling 15-year-old girl with familiar, intelligent eyes. This, I said, my voice breaking, raw with a pain I could no longer contain, is Zoe Jenkins. She is Franklin's daughter. A daughter he has kept hidden from me and from his own son for her entire life. The silence that followed was absolute. 300 people, rendered completely mute, staring at the evidence of a betrayal so vast, so complete, it was almost mythological. And in that perfect, terrible silence, I watched the world I had known for 25 years burn to the ground. The first sound was a single, sharp sob. It came from Madison. She staggered, her hands flying to her mouth, the pristine white of her dress now a tragic costume. Then her legs gave way, and she collapsed onto the grass in a heap of lace and shattered dreams. Chaos, pure, unadulterated chaos. People yelling, phones held high. Judge Ellington frozen in utter humiliation. Franklin stood there, his face a kaleidoscope of rage, panic, and the dawning horror of a man who has just lost everything. And then the coward ran. He bolted, shoving his way through the stunned crowd, knocking over a tray of champagne flutes that shattered on the stone patio. He was fleeing the scene of his own life's crime. But Rose was there. My sister, in her catering uniform, stepped out from behind a large oak tree. As Franklin ran past, she simply stuck out her foot. It was a perfect, almost graceful trip. He fell hard, skidding across the manicured lawn in his expensive suit. "Going somewhere, Franklin?" she asked, her voice casual as she walked over to him.
Elijah was by my side then, his arm firm around me. Madison was being helped up by her sobbing mother, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger at me. You planned this! You ruined my life!" "No, Madison," Elijah said, his voice cold and clear, cutting through her hysteria. "You ruined your own life. You and him." And then the final piece of justice. 2 uniformed police officers walked calmly through the parting crowd. "Madison Ellington?" one said. Her eyes went wide with animal terror. "No!" "You are under arrest for embezzlement and wire fraud." The click of the handcuffs closing was the most satisfying, most horrifying sound I have ever heard. It was over. It was finally, brutally over. In the midst of the chaos, with the flashing lights of the police car painting the scene in streaks of blue and red, Elijah held me. "It's over, Mom," he whispered. "It's finally over." I looked around at the ruins of the perfect day, the overturned chairs, the scattered flowers, the gossiping guests. It was a nightmare. It was a mess. But for the first time in months, I could finally breathe. And that, my friends, was the end of the life I knew and the beginning of the one I was meant to live. But the story doesn't end with the handcuffs and the shattered champagne flutes. The aftermath, the healing, the slow, painful process of building something real from the ashes of so many lies, that is a story for another day. If you'd like to hear what happened next, how we picked up the pieces, how we found our way to a new kind of family, a new kind of love, please let me know in the comments. Your support means everything. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Be kind to yourselves, and I'll see you next time.